You are live. That's what it says right there.
It's funny because I cut out most of this stuff on the shows. If you've wandered over to Apple Podcasts and listened to any of them.
Oh, you clean up the beginning and the end?
Yeah.
Good.
When we're just talking a bunch of ridiculousness.
That's fantastic. We'll get going here at probably one after. Sound right?
That sounds good. Some good stuff to talk about tonight.
We've already got one viewer. It's not even 8 o'clock yet.
No, we had one.
Oh, no. I just
that was Angel. That was Angel going on and then taking the link, putting it on Facebook. I guarantee it.
That's hilarious.
So I ain't staying in and watching this shit.
All right, we'll get going here in a minute.
The Hibachi Mobile truck is coming back to Sherrington this Friday, March 4th. Get some of that, Gilman.
It's a big week for you guys.
Do you know you like the Hibachi Mobile truck?
Hey, I think you should kick this particular episode off with your conversation with Briggs.
Okay.
It'll be out there for eternity.
He'll love that.
I agree.
But my wife might not like it, though. Why you make fun of your son? No, instead of seeing it out here on the internet, I see she liked the Ashland Skateland Pole Green Elementary School Skateland Spirit Night. That's great, honey. She wants to go skating.
She's going to go skating, or your kids are going to go skating?
There we go. It got out there now.
All right,
I'm sure
it's 8:01, dude. What are we talking about?
We are talking about greatest rivalries in sports. And what better time to do that, Paul Gilman, than the week before the Duke-UNC game. The Duke-UNC game where Coach K will be coaching his last game against the hated UNC Tar Heels. Well, we think it's the last, unless they meet in the ACC tournament or the NCAA tournament, which rarely happens. So I think, and you think, that we have a great topic tonight to talk about rivalries in sports. Not just this one, but this is a big one because it's coming up Saturday. So, and I will say this, being a Tar Heel fan, and I know you're a UVA guy, Duke is probably our number one most hated rival. Am I right or wrong there?
Yeah, Duke has been my least favorite team for the last few years. And by few, I mean 25.
Even you, so when Carolina plays Duke, you probably hope it ends in a tie. But are you saying you'd rather Carolina win?
If forced to give an answer to that, I would say yes. I'm very, very, very slightly rooting for UNC. The good news is it's basically a dead heat, and so I always know one of them is going to lose. That makes me happy.
But no, that makes sense. That's not how I look at the Duke UVA games. I definitely root for UVA in those games. And Tim Clark, if you're watching this, sorry. But it's a heated and hated rivalry. They're 8 miles apart. It's funny though, and I don't want to. Yeah, I'm not going to ruin it for people, but I think the rivalry. In fact, I know the rivalry is way more heated between the fans than it is between the players. I think the players all get along. I think they play with each other in the off season. It's not like it used to be. I don't think. I think they all know each other. So it's not like then once in a while it'll get heated. You got your Grayson Allens and the Tyler Hansbroughs who, a flying elbow might hit somebody in the nose and then it gets fired up. But the fans are what makes this rivalry what it is, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these guys, you might have the best 3 players on Duke and the best 3 players on UNC, and 4 of them played on the same AAU team for the last 4 years.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, do you remember and I think we brought this up in a previous podcast, the part in the movie that Jimmy Fallon was in where he's the big Red Sox fan. I can't remember the name of the movie, but it was kind of real time. They were filming this where the Red Sox were down 3-0 to the Yankees, the famous series where they came back and won. But when they were down 3-0, there's a scene where he goes into the restaurant with his girlfriend and he sees the Red Sox players over there having a good old time eating dinner. And he's like, what how can you guys be having a good old time smiling and laughing when we're down 3-0? He's all – and the player's like, yeah, okay, whatever, dude. I'm having dinner. But it's funny how that I'm sure the players at some point back in the day it was probably kind of heated, but it's calmed down a lot. But I'll tell you a quick story that I actually got the chance to go to a Duke-Carolina game. And the weird part about it was the person who gave us tickets was Sheldon Williams, who played for Duke.
Is that our first name drop?
Yes, I think it is.
All right.
But friend of the podcast, Marcus Williams, is his cousin. So Sheldon, when he committed to Duke, told Marcus, hey, because Sheldon's parents are out in Oklahoma, I believe. He said, hey, whenever, you want to come to the game, let me know. So we went to a couple games in Cameron, but we actually went to the Duke-Carolina game in Chapel Hill. So we're sitting in the Duke family section right behind the bench. So imagine me sitting there I don't want to disrespect Sheldon, right, and root for Carolina and act like a fool. So I kind of was quiet most of the game. It was a dramatic overtime loss by Carolina. Duke actually won. Duhan hit a reverse layup, I believe, in overtime. But the craziest thing that happened in this game, and now keep in mind, there's celebrities all up and down the first and second rows across from the benches. So you've got like Grant Hill sitting behind us, Julius Peppers, just up and down. I think Peyton Manning might have been there that night. It was pretty cool to see those people. But out of the corner of my eye, there's this one guy that came with a Duke player. I won't name the player, but it was a guy who'd come to all his games. He's from Texas. And he was wearing a O.J. Simpson throwback jersey that night. And he was giving it to the crowd, right? He's a Duke fan, right? So he's going back and forth with all the students behind us. And when the buzzer hit at the end of the game, everybody around me jumps up in the air. Of course, I'm standing there, looking like I lost my puppy. But I happen to look over, and I see things flying out of the stands. I was like, oh, my gosh, what, people throwing things? And I turn, and OJ has run up into the crowd.
Just to be clear, it's not the actual OJ. It's
no. It's a guy with a throwback OJ jersey. And if you're going to wear that, you're probably asking for people to give you some talk trash to you. But he was talking trash all night. Well, come to find out, he does go in the stands. Security has to get him. But they had thrown little liquor bottles at him. And
plastic or actual bottles?
No, real little, like you get on a plane. Which I think, are they plastic or are they glass?
I think it depends.
I think these, I don't know. I didn't go and inspect them, but they were firing them at him. But to me, that's like the epic Duke Carolina thing right there, just playing out next to you. Whereas the players all, hey, good game, whatever. And then you got fans over here beating each other up. It's just funny. It's not a great story, but it was crazy to be there during that game. One of the loudest places I've ever been to watch a game. And I've been to Cameron, and Cameron's loud, and it's like a high school gymnasium, but it's not as loud as you might think throughout the game. The upper portion is not as loud as it was that day in Carolina. Now, Carolina's got the famous wine and cheese crowd. They sit on their hands a lot, which is true. A bunch of older alumni that go to the games. But so Duke's crowd is louder than Carolina's usually. But that night, man, it was part of the reason why I think I lost my hearing is that night. But anyway.
Well, I'm sorry, that game you were describing with OJ, that was in Carolina. That was at UNC.
That was in Carolina, and he was a friend of a Duke player.
Oh, got it.
And he wore that jersey and just was yapping the whole game, which turned out good for him until, they threw stuff at him. But Marcus will back that story up because he was there. Tim was too. It's a pretty cool story.
Well, and his team lost. No, I'm sorry, his team won.
No, his team won, yeah. I think he wouldn't have gotten to maybe he would have. Who knows? But anyway, so
what year was this?
Go ahead. I figured you'd ask me that. Sheldon was 2004, maybe. I'd look it up.
10 years past OJ doing and not doing whatever he supposedly did. That guy clearly was begging for attention that night.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. I mean, he could have worn anything, and he picked that.
So I want to be clear. You are a rabid UNC fan, mostly born out of the guy whose name you say all the time. Michael Jordan. You have a jersey behind you. God bless you. As you mentioned, I'm a UVA guy. I am. I hate both teams. And I think we've established that I hate Duke basketball just a little bit more. Krzyzewski, it's not only his last game against UNC, it's his last regular season game ever, right?
It's his last regular season game ever. Absolutely.
Yeah, good times. All right, so as a Carolina fan, what's the best win and worst defeat you've witnessed?
The worst defeat is probably the one I was at. Any defeat to Duke is a bad defeat, though. It's the two games that every year I almost don't want to watch because it's such a roller coaster. All the game this year's first game wasn't close, which is rare, but they're always up and down. But let me answer your question. I think the worst loss, I'll just say it was the one I was at because I was there. Probably the best win is Hansbrough's senior year in Cameron, which capped off a 4-0 record for him in Cameron, which we now Carolina fans affectionately call it Hansbrough Indoor Stadium because he was 4-0 there. Yeah, that was pretty cool.
He's maybe the only 3 or 4 year starter that pulled that off, right?
I think he might be. I think the overall record is 138 to 111 Carolina, but I think Carolina piled up a lot of victories early. If you did from the time Coach K started, it's probably a lot more even. And recently Duke has been, Carolina's won their championship, so you can't really say it's been one-sided, but I think Duke's probably been better in the last 20 years than we have overall in the series, not necessarily overall. I think we both won 3 titles in the last 20 years. So,
well, how is Carolina not so good recently? I know Duke beat them, 87-67 at UNC, but I mean, how does UNC with their brand name not have a top 20 team?
That's a great question that I wish I knew the answer to. I think our recruiting took a hit when the scandal came out about the fake classes, but I can't really necessarily say that's all. I don't know if Roy Williams was going after the right players. And I hate to say that but I remember so many times I just scream at the TV, can anybody on this team shoot? I mean, it's like you've got 3 big men out there and 2 guards and no one can shoot. And it's frustrating. And, but I'll say this, Duke has fallen into in the last 10, 15 years, the one and done folks, the guys that have come in, play for a year and they're gone. And I think Krzyzewski made that work once with, I don't even think that team had a lot of great one and done. It's a Justice Winslow team with who was that big center they had, but they made it work that year. But that must be rough. I've talked to Tim a little bit about it. He's a big Duke guy, and he said it's hard having a new team every year, pretty much like Kentucky was doing. Every year you got 5 new freshmen, and you're like, Coach K will be able to mold this team into a championship team, and it rarely happens. I mean, you got to have 3rd and 4th year players to win championships. I think it's rare that a freshman laden team can. I mean, go all the way back to Michigan, the Fab Five. I mean, they made it to 2 finals in a row. They couldn't win the big one though, and they lost to Duke and Carolina, ironically.
Interestingly enough, yeah, I think what's going to happen to Duke over the next few years under whatever that guy's name is who's taking Coach K's place is they're eventually not going to be able to recruit 6 to 8, 3 to 5 star guys every year. They're going to be one and done. They're eventually going to have to come to grips with 2 or 3 of their stars are going to have to play 3 or 4 years. And when they try to make that transition, they're not going to be very good for at least 2 years.
You would think. I think a lot of the transfer portal opening up the last few years has helped. I know it's helped Carolina. Now we've got a couple guys on our team now in our rotation of 7 that are transfers. Duke may end up hitting that. But still, if you're a kid coming out of high school and you're a 5-star, I mean, where are you going to go, right? If you're a 5-star, you normally are thinking about the pros. So who's going to get you there? Well, I mean, you're going to probably go to Kentucky. You're going to go to Duke. You're going to go to UNC. I think it's changing a little bit. I think people are starting to go to the Gonzagas of the world. And I've seen some guys going to Memphis or going to other places. And I think that's great for college basketball. I wish it was more parity across the board when it came to recruiting. kind of like college football. Not that we're jumping into that yet, but do all the top guys have to go to Alabama, Clemson, and Ohio State? I mean, they want to get to the pros though.
Apparently, if you're a defensive lineman, offensive lineman, running back, wide receiver, et cetera, like Alabama is like 3 deep at every position.
Yeah.
Their second string team can beat every team that's not in the top 15.
Yeah. Seems that way, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
It is. It is. But so UNC Duke, it's going to be a great game this Saturday. I hope it's not a blowout again. I have a feeling that Carolina's will come out playing better because they have to after getting blown out in Chapel Hill a couple weeks ago, and I think the Duke players are going to be a little nervous, being it's Coach K's last home game, all the pomp and circumstance. Hopefully, for my sake, the Tar Heels jump out on them and make it a good game. I don't expect Carolina to win. This is not a great Carolina team at all, and it's a pretty good Duke team. So we'll see. It'll be fun.
They've got 7 or 8 kids that have a chance to make the NBA. Duke does.
Duke does, and I think Carolina's got maybe 1.
So this game, I've talked to a handful of Duke graduates and how long they wait. The Carolina game is the one that they're out there for a really, I can't remember how long, but it's a ridiculous amount of time. Being Coach K's last, I can't imagine.
They're there now.
Yeah.
I would imagine they're out there now. And what's it called? Shashevskyville
or K-ville or whatever. Yeah.
I can't. It's gonna be fun just to see who's at the game Saturday night, because it's gonna be tons of ex-Duke players. The Peyton Mannings of the world are gonna show up. It's gonna be a cool scene.
Do you think Barack Obama will show up?
He might. I know Reggie Love was on his staff, right? Reggie Love, the Duke grad, was on his staff or something when he was president. So I don't know if it was security or what it was.
He played basketball at Duke. Yeah, and he was on Barack Obama's staff.
Yep.
And he's got one of the best last names ever.
Yes, he does.
All
Absolutely.
right, so Duke-UNC is probably the biggest rivalry in college basketball. I mean, there can be debate from people that are not from this part of the world, but I think you're kind of being silly if you say there's another rivalry. I don't think the western half of the U.S. has anybody to put up for that basketball-wise.
No.
The Northeast, maybe some old Big East rivalry stuff, Georgetown, Syracuse kind of thing.
That's exactly what I was going to say. That's all you could really come up with.
Yeah, and the SEC hasn't been dominant in basketball for long enough to have a rivalry that really matters.
Yeah.
And by the way, our crack research staff is letting the world know that he doesn't like either team either, but he hates Duke more than he hates UNC.
You gotta love it. So let's talk about great rivalries in other sports. Then let me throw a sport out. You tell me what you think the best rivalry is. And
is this rapid fire, or do I have to defend what I'm saying?
No, we can discuss it. I mean, it doesn't have to be rapid fire. But I'm talking about rivalries in the history, not just in the last 10 years. Now, if there's one that's been in the last 10 years that you think has made it the best rivalry, then let's talk about it. But I'm going to start with college football.
Look, Rob's on this. Rob is viewing this. So I think there are 2 rivalries that are at the top tier, and then everybody else is second tier or worse. There's the Auburn-Alabama rivalry, which, I mean, if you've ever talked to football fans from Alabama, they're literally out of their minds. Most of them take it far too seriously, and you want to shake them and say, "Hey, this is a game. It's a fun game. The competition's outstanding, but it's just a game." Yeah. But there's something to that, and that certainly makes their rivalry a powerful rivalry. And the other one is Michigan-Ohio State.
Yeah, they're poisoning trees down there in Alabama.
Yeah, what did that happen a few years ago? I mean, why would you do that? What are you doing?
They can't get enough. Yeah, and I do think Ohio State and Michigan is probably. I mean, for me, I've enjoyed the Ohio State-Michigan rivalry more, and I have no skin in the game, more than the Auburn-Alabama rivalry. But I will say that it used to be a rivalry that I enjoyed almost as much, and that was Oklahoma-Nebraska. Do you remember in the 70s?
Yeah, you go back, man. those games were awesome.
Yeah, Tom Osborne and Barry Switzer.
Yeah,
Those were they man, and both teams were always 10-1 or 11-1 or 10-0 when they met. It was, and I think they played the same day as Ohio State, Michigan back then. If I'm not mistaken, but
yeah. Nebraska and Oklahoma they were recruiting across the country. I remember a kid from Highland Springs. What was his name? Brian Washington.
Yep.
Went to Nebraska. I'm like, what?
What's he doing?
Are you kidding me? But Nebraska is not that team anymore. They're recruiting in the Midwest. They might pick up a handful of kids from either coast, but they're not the program they used to be. Oklahoma is like borderline relevant. They're in and out of the top 4 for the playoffs for the last few years. These days that's not a rivalry anymore. I mean, it's a rivalry. It's not relevant. Huh?
I don't know if I'd say borderline relevant. I mean, they've been one of the top 4 teams for the last 10 years.
Oklahoma. Well, but I don't think anybody going into any of those years thought they were going to win the whole thing. I'm saying Clemson, maybe Alabama, not. And now Georgia have been dominant, and nobody else really has a meaningful chance.
Yeah, it's almost like you're trying to get in just to get into the playoffs and then lose to one of those teams you just mentioned, but. I see Randolph-Macon and Hampton-Sydney. That may trump them all.
I don't know about trumping them all. It is the oldest rivalry in the South. It has been going on for quite some time. But I would, and I'm not throwing shade at RMC or Hampton-Sydney students or football players, but yeah, I mean it's Division III.
I'll drink to that.
What are you drinking? Something fun?
No, been a little under the weather, so it's nothing.
Are we settling on Ohio State, Michigan being the big college football rivalry?
Yeah, I think so. So when
I think because Auburn has been a doormat for Alabama for the last 20 years, with a
when they do.
Exceptions.
But I will say this: when they do step up and win one of those games, it's usually in crazy fashion, like the guy who returned the missed field goal for a touchdown.
109 yards.
Yeah, about 5 or 6 years ago. That was amazing.
Yeah, maybe the best last play in a rivalry game ever.
Yeah.
What was the game? It may not have been Michigan, Ohio State. Might have been Michigan State. That punter flubbed the snap.
Yeah, Michigan State, Michigan. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, unbelievable.
Oof. And those are good games too. Michigan State, Michigan that's a great rivalry.
But that's how big the Ohio State-Michigan rivalry is. It beats Michigan State.
Yeah. Michigan State fans don't want to hear it, but that's true.
No, it's complete. Well, they've been doing it for a long time, and it's been competitive for most years.
Yeah.
Wow, yeah. Rob's coming out with some fun facts, like Michigan losing 15 of the last 17 of the Buckeyes. I didn't realize it was that bad. Maybe we need to go back to Auburn, Alabama.
Who won this year? I can't remember.
Oh, wow. I think you know who won, and you're just throwing that shade at Rob. All right, you want me to name a sport?
Sure.
Let's go Major League Baseball.
Well, I'm a West Coast fan, so the first one that pops in my head is LA San Francisco, but that's not the rivalry that I think has caught the nation's attention or my attention as much as the Red Sox Yankees. And I hate to say that one because it's kind of just played out, and it's not as big a rivalry now as it was, but they're from I would say late 90s, maybe 2000 up to 2018, those games were ridiculous, and they took forever. They were like 4.5-hour games because every pitch was it was crazy. It was crazy. And I'm not a Yankees fan, so I was mostly rooting for the Red Sox. And they came out on the short end most of the time, but that comeback from 3-0 was amazing. And is there anybody? I mean, I know the Cubs and Cardinals and Cubs is a big rivalry for those fans. I know the Mets are rivals with, the Phillies, but I just don't know if that's going to capture the nation's attention like a Yankees Red Sox rivalry. So I'd say Yankees Red Sox. You got to be careful out there with the Dodgers Giants, though. People getting hurt in those parking lots.
Oh no, people have gone to the hospital. I think somebody died from their injuries, walking in the parking lot after a game.
Yeah,
it's crazy. I I would like to think people on the East Coast have a little more sense in that. I don't think it's even close. I get how rabid the fans are for the Giants and the Dodgers, but Yankees, Red Sox, they're really old. Both teams, especially maybe not the last 3 or 4 years, but there was a good 15-year period where they were both really good and highly competitive, and you weren't sure who was going to come out of the division to go far, if not win the whole thing.
Yeah. It was some fun games. And they got into it too. Remember Pedro Martinez throwing Don Zimmer to the ground? I mean, he shouldn't laugh at that. It was an old man getting thrown down, but it didn't hurt him. But it's still, they were going at it. They were going at it. Alex Rodriguez. I mean, anybody you put in the rivalry, that's what made it so cool. There wasn't always the same players. You'd bring in other players from other teams, and they would get immersed in it almost immediately. The hatred for each other. So, and they played 18 times a year. So that's a lot of times to go after each other.
Yeah. And New York is a giant city that spends a ton of money, and Boston wasn't spending a ton of money until maybe the last 15, 20 years.
Right.
Boston's a much smaller place in terms of geographic area and population. So they're kind of the little brother. And when they finally won that first series, I was ecstatic. Nobody likes a team that wins that many times. I mean, what do they have, 28, 29?
Unless it's your team, right? I mean, if you're a Yankees fan,
sure. If I'm a Yankees fan, I love it. Absolutely. Yeah, no question.
But we don't like it. The rest of us don't like it, especially when your team is the Padres and they never win. So, yeah, I'm not a big fan. And we finally get to the World Series again in '98. Who do we get to play? The Yankees. That's great. All right, so let's switch it up. I'm going to give you one. And we'll go off the beaten path a little bit. How about tennis? Give me the best rivalry ever in tennis.
So it's weird that I've watched tennis as long as I have, and I don't watch any tournaments I don't watch the Australian Open. It's one of the big four. I don't really watch the French as much, even though I watched it a fair amount as a kid. Wimbledon I'll watch just because I think it's probably the coolest tournament they have in tennis. U.S. Open is also it's probably their second biggest. It's hard to ignore the current guys. Federer is on the downside, but he's been amazing the last 20 years. Nadal's been ridiculous. And then what's the Serbian guy's name? I'm drawing a blank.
Djokovic, who may end up being the one who wins the most.
Yeah, right now it's Nadal, but only because he shockingly won the Australian Open, which Djokovic didn't get to play in. And Djokovic, I think, is still the world number one. Yeah, but they don't seem to have a heated rivalry, those two. I have to go back to the early mid-'80s when Borg was dominating Wimbledon. I think he won 6 of them, and McEnroe won 1 or 2. But every time those two played, there were some amazing rallies, and McEnroe would lose his mind on the chair umpire. And he really wanted to be yelling at Borg, but he could get away with yelling at the chair umpire.
100% agree. McEnroe, Borg, and it's not weird to watch tennis, dude, because I've been watching it as long as you have. I loved it in the late 70s and the 80s. It was so much fun to watch it. But McEnroe and Borg, because it was such a opposites. Borg's all quiet and just calm and cool and collected, and McEnroe's hair is on fire from point one. He was amazing.
Yeah, Borg, was he Swiss or Swedish? I can't remember. I think he's Swiss. Didn't say a word. He kind of had his hair was longer, but it was kind of low key. McEnroe had this kind of afro thing going on. He's a loudmouth, hot-headed guy from New York. Just their personalities alone made it a compelling competition. But the fact that they were highly competitive, U.S. Open and Wimbledon, and I'm probably forget Australian Open. I'm sure they were fairly competitive too.
Well. And not to break it down too far, but their styles of tennis, the way they played were different as well. Like Borg liked to stay back and rally. McEnroe was chipping and charging whenever he could. So it made for a fun match to watch, just the two different styles, who was going to force the pace, if you will, of the match. And it was, I never sat there and watched a 5-set match and thought, man, this is taking forever. It was fun every time we watched it. But I'll tell you another one that I thought was getting traction, but I think they're Sampras and Agassi. I think could have been bigger than it was. I think Agassi ended up winning like 8 and Sampras won 14 majors, but those two seemed like they didn't like each other much. And it made for because Agassi was all flashy. It was almost like kind of like a Borg McEnroe. Sampras real quiet, reserved, then a big serve. And then Agassi's over there with his denim shorts on and hair flying everywhere, and all the girls loved him. So it was just a different thing to watch. But what about?
I think that's into the conversation for sure.
What about Chris Evert and Martina Navratilova?
You could make an easy argument that was the biggest rivalry of all of them, even surpassing Borg, McEnroe, and then Rob's throwing out Connors and Borg.
I think Connors was such a wild firecracker that he had a rivalry with everybody. I think Elina Stasi was his first big, like they almost got in a fisticuffs, and then him and McEnroe would get into it, and Lindell, and Connors was fun to watch.
The only two things I remember about Jimmy Connors, one, he was hot tempered like McEnroe was. He was a very good tennis player, very very skilled, fun to watch, especially when he got on the roll. But the tennis racket he used, the head on it was like the size of a softball. I don't understand how he was playing with that. Everybody else was using these giant Prince rackets, and he's using something that was tiny.
But I think him and Lindell were the first ones that went to like the metal racket, and I think that's how big it was when they started off. So everybody had those wood rackets that we all played with, and then they came out with that thing, and it looked so crazy. You're like, what do you now look at rackets, and there's no way to miss the ball. It's so big. But yeah, tennis was fun, man.
Yeah. All right. That was a good one. Surprisingly fun conversation. And Rob, I let's throw this out. I'm going to say Navratilova, Chris Evert was the best rivalry in tennis.
Okay. I can't argue with that.
Are you agreeing with me, or are you going to throw another one?
No, I'm agreeing. And just for the fact that they were 1-2 for all those years.
Always.
No one, until Steffi Graf came along, no one could touch him. And Graf, I think, had it out with Navratilova a little bit, but she was so young, she kind of pushed Navratilova on out the door. Ken Rosewall and
Rob is giving us a reason to move away from tennis right now. He's talking about a 13-year rivalry between Rosewall and Laver. I've heard of Laver, best Australian tennis player ever. I don't know who the hell Rosewall is.
I think he was Australian too. But anyway. So what's your next sport?
I'm gonna stay in the single person pursuit of greatness in a sport, even though you can play doubles in tennis. I'm gonna throw out golf.
Golf. Well, the easy answer is Tiger and Phil, but I'll be honest, I don't know if I really look at that as a rivalry as much, because it was such a one-sided situation. I think Nicklaus and Palmer, even though Nicklaus is probably the Tiger of that duo, really. So Palmer is more like Mickelson. It's kind of the same situation. One dominated the other. I think we got kind of cheated by not having Nicklaus and Tiger in their primes together, because I don't know if there's what are you going to say? Bryson DeChambeau and Brooks Koepka? I don't know. I'll tell you what it is, Paul. The Ryder Cup. That's the best rivalry in golf.
Oh, wow. Look at you. Throwing me a curveball.
Easily. Yeah.
It's the most excited I get for a tournament other than the Masters, I think. I'm glued to the Masters every year. And whoever's most competitive in that tournament, I kind of view as a rivalry. But I don't know. They have a new winner every year. It's very hard to repeat there. Did Tiger ever repeat at the Masters?
Did Tiger repeat at the Masters?
Our crack research staff, I guarantee, is looking this up. And by the way, he threw out Nicklaus and Watson. I agree. Watson, because he won a bunch of British Opens and was usually in the mix for Grand Slam tournaments.
Yeah, and you could throw Greg Norman in there with anybody, but there's really nobody that. Here's the sad part: Greg Norman should have won 10 majors and won 2. He always had someone making some crazy shot to beat him. He literally, and the crack research staff may have to follow me up on this, but I don't know what year it was, but I believe he came in second at the Masters when Larry Mize hit a crazy chip shot to beat him. He then went to the U.S. Open, and Bob Tway or somebody hit a bunker shot on the 18th hole to beat him. Then he went to the British Open and won it. Then went to the PGA, and I believe lost in a playoff or somebody did something. He could have won the Grand Slam that year, but just bad luck. And then, of course, the meltdown at the Masters in '96, which is they're doing a TV show about that now. But yeah, Norman and Faldo. And Faldo almost felt bad winning that day. I think Tiger has won back-to-back Masters one time. Something tells me he had to put the jacket on himself, but I could be wrong.
Or they would go back to the guy who won 2 years ago, kind of thing.
Yeah. Ed Half won back-to-back wiffle golf championships and had to put the jacket on himself one time. That was kind of
the world famous Ed Half wiffle golf player.
You didn't think Ed Half would get a shout out tonight, did you?
I did not see that coming. All right, throw another sport out. What do we got? What are we missing?
Pro football, the NFL.
Oh, God, the recency thing is throwing me off here. If you had asked me back in the late '80s, early '90s, I would have said Skins Cowboys.
Yeah.
The Patriots haven't had a real rival in the last 25 years. Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, some people would say Green Bay, Chicago.
Which, has that been a rivalry, though? I think the
Not
fans
really.
think it is, but what about Pittsburgh, Baltimore?
Because Baltimore's moved, they
Kinda
used to be
lost
the Colts. Then the
Yeah, and it's
current
not the
Ravens
Colts.
used to be the Browns. Like I don't know what to make of all that.
Yeah, I just think that they've been pretty vicious with each other the last 15 years. Those games have been like headhunting games. You know what I mean? And I can't think of another. Now, if you want to go back a little ways, like you said, Washington, Dallas. I think was it Oakland? What was the rivalry that I was thinking about? It was Oakland, Pittsburgh back in the 70s. Was
when they
a pretty
always
good
met in the
rivalry.
playoffs. Yeah.
Yeah, they always met in the playoffs. There was immaculate reception. Was Oakland, Pittsburgh. Yeah. So yeah, Tiger won one time back to back. But yeah, pro football is a tough one because the free agency kind of threw that off a little bit. I mean, it didn't create a lot of rivalries. I'm sure people would argue that, the Chargers in Oakland, that would be my rival, right? Every team has a rival. I don't know who's Tampa Bay's big rival. Somebody in your division, Atlanta, New Orleans. So
yeah.
I don't know. So let's skip on to another one next. I know there's rivalries in this next sport.
Skins Cowboys, but
Skins Cowboys is the one. And yeah, Rob says Steelers Ravens too.
Are we going to end on the NBA because we're at 38 minutes?
Yes, NBA. You want me to hit?
Yeah, go ahead.
So I think there are 2 that stand out and 3 that really stand out in my lifetime, and I'll rank them. Number 3 would be Sixers Celtics in the late 70s, early 80s. Those were fantastic games. I mean, they met in the playoffs every year. The winner would always go to the finals and play the Lakers. Number 2, remember this is me. Number 2, Lakers Celtics. The unfortunate part about that is they only played twice a year, but then if they were going to play again, it was in the finals, and that happened 4 times in the 80s. So that was so much fun to watch. And they met again, in 2008 or 9. Yeah. So that's always been a rivalry. But
you're in my world, Bulls. Oh my God! Number Pistons. 1, go ahead.
I mean, that. So look, all right. Take the fandom out of it. The thing that made Michael Jordan who he was those Pistons. That is what made him. He might have become Michael Jordan to win 6 championships at some point, maybe. But going through that against those Pistons, and I hated them. Oh my gosh! And I'm sure a Pistons fan hated the Bulls.
They had Lambeer, Mahorn.
Oh my goodness!
Isaiah Thomas, Rodman for the first 3 championships. Chicago won, and the second 3 he ends up in Chicago, right? Well, look, I'm not saying.
Go ahead.
It wasn't just the Pistons that beat up the Bulls. The Pacers took shots at him. The
Yeah.
Knicks took shots at him.
Absolutely.
But if you have
But
to
the
pick
Pistons beat
a
'em.
rivalry for the Bulls, it's the Pistons.
Yeah,
But I
I
don't
mean,
know if that's number one,
they
man.
well, who do you think's number one? Lakers,
Celtics,
Celtics?
Lakers. Yeah, all day.
Yeah, well,
All day.
I'm not gonna argue with that. Well, they're the 2 best teams ever, and then the 2 best franchises in NBA history, and they've played in the finals more than anybody else. So, yeah, I can't argue with that. I don't know if it was heated at all times, but it got heated in the 80s. There were punches thrown. I know Kareem. I mean, when you get Kareem Abdul-Jabbar to throw a punch, you're getting somebody fired up.
Yeah, it takes a lot to get that dude to throw a punch. All right, we'll have to agree to disagree on that one. All right, cool. What are we talking about next week? Because we're at 40 minutes.
We are going to talk about, I hope we're going to have a guest, and we're going to talk about the conference championship tournaments that we're about to embark on, March Madness. So it'll be the beginning of March Madness next week, and then the following week we hope to talk about the NCAA tournament bracket that'll be coming out. So we're going to have some good couple weeks coming up.
Just to round this out, apparently Tiger went back-to-back in 01-02.
Right.
Nice.
Yeah, he put the jacket on himself.
Or whoever won in 2000 put it on him, right on. Cool. All right, good times.
Later.